The South African Airways flights that have now been cancelled. And joining me in the studio now is SAA spokesperson Tlali Tlali. Tlali, thank you so much for joining us, and very good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you.
Really, what is at the core of this issue which has led to the grounding of flights between the two countries?
Insofar as our airline is concerned, you will be aware that the SAA has been operating between South Africa and Zimbabwe for more than 2 decades.
Right.
For us to be able to operate means that we must be able to fulfill the requirements that are set out by the authorities in any destination to which we fly. In this case, we have been operating as normal for many years, and we were taken by surprise when we learned this morning that as an airline, we are required to produce a foreign operator's permit, something that has never been a requirement all these years. And it is also interesting the manner in which the decision was communicated, the time at which it was communicated, because we went about our normal operations this morning, preparing the aircraft, passenger getting on board the aircraft, and it was only at that time that we received a notification to the effect that we will not be able to operate in the absence of the foreign operator's permit.
And what then is the reason for the flight that has now been grounded here in South Africa?
We wouldn't like to enter that space. You know, we have become aware that there's an aircraft that is also grounded here. The relevant authorities should be able to speak on the matter and indicate what their reasons are. We do not want to further fuel speculation or to second guess the decision makers in this regard. We are focusing on our own operations, and we were hoping that the situation would be resolved as quickly as possible. Sadly, we have to announce to our customers and everybody who intended to fly between the two countries today that the SAA has taken a decision to cancel all flights for today.
Now, who is responsible for the issuance of this, the so-called operator's license, and what's happening now in that case?
Perhaps this should also enable the viewers to also appreciate the situation in terms of aviation industry. There is a relationship that is owned by governments. In this case, you will say South African government and the Zimbabwean government have taken a decision to enter into an agreement, which is a bilateral SABC agreement, on the basis of which the two countries will allow carriers to fly passengers in opposite directions from Zimbabwe to South Africa and vice versa. So that agreement is in place, but below that, you have the regulators coming on board, and they will then stipulate what the requirements are for an airline to be able to operate in their market. So in this case, the regulator in Zimbabwe will then prescribe and say, these are the requirements that SAA or any other carrier that operates to Zimbabwe must be able to meet. And at the time when we made their application, we were able to satisfy and meet those requirements. Hence, we have been operating for more than 2 decades.
Now, let's look at the timing of this tiff between the two airlines. There are many people are asking whether this has nothing to do with the diplomatic tiff between South Africa and Zimbabwe over Zimbabwe's First Lady, Grace Mugabe.
I don't know it is something that we can pronounce on, but we have taken note of that kind of a suggestion, which some people would call a conspiracy theory. We see ourselves really as collateral damage, if you like, because decisions have been taken, and us as SAA, being a carrier that has been operating all this time, there were never issues, but all of a sudden, this requirement became on the table as part of conditions that must be fulfilled, and there was never a notice period. It was imposed on us, as I said, as we are about to take off out of Harare.
But now, from what you are saying, then it looks like there won't be an agreement between the two airlines. So are you engaging now at probably government level, at head of state level, at the SADC summit now, which is currently on? Is that a possibility at all?
SAA is a state-owned company, and our shareholder is government.
Right.
We have brought the matter to the relevant offices in government for them to look into it. It is a decision that is not taken by us as airline, but it is the decision to operate. It is the decision that is taken by the regulatory authorities, your civil aviation authority, anywhere in the world. Take, for example, our flights to the US, our flights to UK and to Europe, any other destination for that matter, even some on the African continent. We are required to fulfill and comply with the requirements. And if any of these regulating authorities is not satisfied with our compliance issues, one, they will have to notify us to be compliant, and two, if we are not compliant, then they will take a decision to suspend our permit, which means we will not be able to operate. And none of this happened in this instance.
And you were saying just a short while ago that all flights for today have now been cancelled. But is there any likelihood that flights can resume tomorrow? Do you see that possibility at all, given the situation on the ground?
We cannot rule out that possibility. And at the time when we became aware of this incident, we then activated our structures when we had a look at our plans, and we're keeping an eye on the watch so that we could see a possibility in the event the matter is resolved, us activating our recovery plans. And that would have meant that we would have explored a possibility of combining certain flights, deploying wide-body aircraft that have a bigger capacity in order to accommodate everyone. But as matters stand, we are not even able to do just that. The impact is not only on the passengers who are stuck in Zimbabwe or those who want to leave from South Africa. We as a carrier, we are impacted beyond this particular flight because the impact is on our wider network. But the decision that has been taken will enable us and all other carriers to make other arrangements. Because remember, Johannesburg is a hub. So that means that traffic comes from all other parts of the continent to come to South Africa in Johannesburg to connect in order to go to their final destinations. So the decision that we have made now enables everybody who was keeping an eye on the situation, including other carriers, because there could have been passengers who are stuck that side, who are coming to Johannesburg to connect, who now know that this is not a possibility for the day. Hopefully, a solution will be found as soon as possible so that we are able to recover from tomorrow onwards.
And what numbers are we talking about, both in terms of the cost to the airline and the number of passengers that have been affected? And what alternative arrangements are you making?
The costs we are not able to quantify immediately, but what we can indicate is that the flight that was supposed to operate at 7 o'clock this morning from Harare had approximately 140 passengers who are stuck that side. But as for us to be able to conduct a proper costing exercise involve a number of factors for which we need information before we could make an announcement on that. Because these passengers, it is not a fault of theirs. SAA as an airline will treat them as its passengers, and normal standard procedures that relate to passengers will be put in place, one of which involves putting the passengers on later flights, even if it is tomorrow, without necessarily causing them to pay penalties for that, because it is a situation not of their own making. Ordinarily, if a passenger, depending on the ticket they have, if they were to miss a flight and want to travel later on, they would have to pay penalties. So in this case, we are not doing that. We are also looking at the possibility of providing them with one night's accommodation, because this is an industry practice.
Now, should this issue then be resolved, how much time do you think you will need for the operations to get back to normal?
It is difficult to tell because I don't have the numbers with me here, but my colleagues, there's a team that is sitting at the head office as we speak that is making arrangements based on the confirmed bookings that we have, and that will enable us to have our recovery plans kicking in. As I indicated, one of them is to say, if we have X number of flights a day, you will have to combine them. For example, as it is today, on Saturday, SAA had 8 scheduled flights that were meant to operate between Johannesburg and 2 points in Zimbabwe, that is Harare and Victoria Falls, in opposite directions. So all of those are cancelled, and what it means is that we'll have to make a calculation as to how best can we accommodate these passengers if we are going to resume with operations tomorrow. Well,
we certainly hope there will be a speedy resolution to this impasse, but thank you so much. That was Tlali Tlali there, the South African Airways spokesperson. Now, the incoming Southern African Development Community SADC chairperson, that is President Jacob Zuma, has officially opened the SADC Heads of State Summit in Pretoria. The summit is bringing Southern African regional leaders together to bring lasting peace and stability in the bloc. Our reporter, Patricia Visaki,